by Omedia Network India. The Indian Express Think is a thought-provoking forum that brings together thoughtful leaders, policymakers, and corporate leaders to encourage a substantive exchange of ideas and get the best minds to give it direction and solutions. The series will center on the holistic perspective of urbanization in India. I am delighted to share a glimpse about the series.
India is on the brink of a transformative urban evolution. With only 31% of the population residing in cities, according to the 2011 census, the need for focused urban development to unlock India's full potential is undeniable. The World Bank predicts over 600 million urban residents by 2036. But without proper governance, this surge could strain infrastructure, worsen climate issues, and affect city living. To achieve the ambitious goal of cities contributing 75% of India's GDP by 2030, effective governance is crucial to foster innovation, entrepreneurship, and job creation. India requires $840 billion by 2036 to adequately invest in urban infrastructure. Additionally, cities across India need an estimated $1.2 trillion in capital funding by 2030 to meet the demands of their burgeoning populations. Developing affordable housing and expanding access to basic amenities, healthcare, education, and a clean environment for all residents are crucial to enhancing overall quality of life. What can Indian cities learn from the global experience to become better governed? What lessons can Indian cities draw from our own experience? Does the solution require minor legislative changes, or are deep structural changes needed? To make sense of India's urbanization, the Indian Express and the Omedia Network India present a series of discussions on our cities, scrutinizing the challenges and the growth markers that can make Indian cities truly smart and meet our citizens' evolving aspirations.
Thank you so much. I think the AV has explained the need of the hour beautifully. So as we get started, let me take you through the agenda of today's event. Today's session will host a special keynote address by Dr. P.T.R. Valinivel Thiagarajan, Minister for Information Technology and Digital Services, Tamil Nadu, a fireside chat with Mr. K. Chandru, retired Judge, Madras High Court, followed by an insightful panel discussion on Is My City Taking Proactive Steps to Tackle Climate Change? The session is live on all social media handles of the Indian Express. May I now request Mr. Udit Misra, Associate Editor, The Indian Express, to join us on the stage for a welcome note.
Thank you, esteemed guests. I'm very grateful to the keynote speaker and the fireside chat guest, Justice Chandru, for sparing the time, especially Minister who is on a very busy day today, for sparing the time today and sharing his thoughts. Just giving a brief recap on the series, we at Indian Express, along with the Omedia Network in India, we've been running a whole series of seminars on urbanization. And this is the third edition where we are in-person meeting with experts to discuss issues. The first edition was on governance, which I think is at the bedrock of many of the problems that we face in urbanization in India. And I think some of those thoughts will perhaps percolate in today's discussion also. The second was in Bangalore, which was about infrastructure and what sort of ails with India's infrastructure story. And today's edition is about climate change. So the idea is to focus, look at one aspect of the larger problem, which is climate change, and focus it on urban issues. Often, in common parlance, we tend to designate any sad event to climate change these days. Anything is, instead of having a clear understanding of how exactly is climate change affecting us, what exactly is climate change, and how is it impacting different sections of the society, the economy, and then to understand how to solve them if you once know what is the nature of the problem. So the expectation in this towards the whole evening today, starting with the keynote address, is to understand what is the nature of the challenge and where might the solutions lie. I'm hoping that by the end of the evening, all of us would have a slightly better grasp on exactly what climate change means for our cities. And in India, cities are essentially about, it's an opportunity for India to grow. If our cities do not work, then the notions of India being a developed country, those are fairly empty. So if India has to work out and really achieve its potential, cities are where jobs will be created, prosperity will come. So I'm hoping that by the end of the session, we'll have a better grip on understanding how climate change affects us. And in particular, we're doing it in Chennai because of the coastal city effect. One of the first things I read in geography was that Tamil Nadu had the most unique agroclimatic framework. And I want to understand, and I'm hoping that experts can explain what are the vulnerabilities that a coastal city typically has due to climate change. And then hopefully we'll have some solutions which we can ponder over, maybe push for in our different fields. Me as a journalist writing about it and in your own way. So very grateful for your time to come here, and let's get it started. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Misra, for joining us on stage. I now have the privilege of inviting Dr. P.T.R. Palanivel Thiagarajan, Minister for Information Technology and Digital Services, Tamil Nadu, to join us on stage and address the audience. Can we welcome sir with a round of applause? Very warm welcome to you, sir.
Thank you very much, all of you, for being here and for inviting me. I just landed at the airport a little while ago and came here, and on my way I was thinking that maybe this is not the right person for this topic, that the IT minister is probably not the right one to speak about either climate change or urbanization or even urban policy and planning. But in some sense, I think the possibilities of what we can do today are so much driven by technology that maybe it's not such a bad fit. But I was just thinking about something on the slide which exemplifies our problems in India. So it starts with saying 31% of our population lives in cities in 2011. Just think about that. How do you do any policy or planning or execution if your data is 13 years old? It's grotesque that we do all this without any kind of information. Anyway, in Tamil Nadu, we think the number is closer to 51% or 52%, the most urbanized state in the country. And I remember some discussions with fellow MLAs when I was an opposition member, fellow MLAs from Uttar Pradesh in some conference. And they had this view that urbanization was going to be the panacea, They were going to be able to provide better quality of life, better infrastructure, better services to their citizens when they became more urban concentrated. I think the logic being that it's easier to lay common pipes or roads or infrastructure when people are agglomerated in one place. In fact, our experience says that that's not necessarily true. I mean, it's true in some parts of the world, but in places in India, we have seen development happen without too much planning in a lot of ways. And the complexities of that are becoming even more apparent with increasing evidence of climate change and shifting weather patterns. But I want to start at the basics. The whole logic of urbanization is that it facilitates kind of accelerated economic activity, right? Like the more you get people together in one place, you will find the multiplier effects to be greater. If you are an agrarian economy, it's very hard to do that because you can only farm where the land is. If you're anything other than an agrarian economy, the logic or the notion is that by getting greater and greater masses of people together, you get network externalities, you get multiplier effects. But from a government perspective or from an urban policy and planning perspective, it seems to me the goal should be that we want to provide all citizens with a life of some basic dignity when it comes to water, when it comes to drainage, when it comes to clean environment with efficient garbage removal, when it comes to proper roads and transportation, when it comes to streetlights, basic things that make the quality of life and that should determine or decide whether the society is advanced and progressive or not. If that's the case, we in some places start with a really complex legacy, because if you take the US, it's easy to do urban planning when your country is 200 or 300 years old, and by then the world had already figured out a lot of different things and you were able to implement them. But even within the US, you can see the quality of urban planning or infrastructure is vastly different in a city like Boston than it is even in New York, and even more so if you go down to newer expanded cities like in Texas or North Carolina. In Europe, you can see the spread between old cities like Rome and newer cities. And in India, you can see cities like Madurai that have been, in constant habitation for 2,000 or more years. And for us to basically bring in any new master plan or new kind of framework is very difficult. But it was not always so. I mean, if you look at our culture, it's not as if we haven't had a history of planned cities and development. You look at the Indus Valley, which most of us would agree is, the prototypical kind of Dravidian plan. And now the vision of that is recreated in Kiladi. When we go and do the excavations, we see almost exactly the same kind of engineering and design. And you look in other parts around the world, there are legacies. You look at the Roman Empire's, ruins that you can find in Bath in the UK or in Byblos in Lebanon. And so there have been eras when people have really planned and developed agglomerated population centers, we call them cities now, whatever they were then, with relatively thoughtful design. In our case, I think part of the problem has been just the rapid explosion of population. If you look at the country as a whole, our population since independence is probably somewhere between 3 and 4 times what it was. If you have that kind of development in 75 years in a democracy, it's very hard for most politicians to make the trade-off, because what urban planning calls for, what it requires at the core, is long-term thinking. And this is before we even talk about climate change. Just core urban planning requires you to think 50 years, 75 years, 100 years. And most people are worried about 5-year election cycles. So it's very hard to match the kind of scale of expansion that we've had to deal with and, the 5-year cycle where most people can't afford to plan for 40 years. You'll have to have 8 elections in between. So I think, we have many, many examples of failure. When we were sitting outside talking about some points to cover, I think about Madurai. In my lifetime, I'm 58 years old. My memory probably stretches back 50 years, maybe. In my lifetime, the 8 or 9 water bodies around my house have all been encroached. And who have they been encroached by? The government of India, the government of Tamil Nadu, and the city of Madurai, right? Water bodies around my house now have the Income Tax Office, Kendriya Vidyalaya, All India Radio, the city, Madurai City Corporation's office, the district court, the high court, police reserve line. I mean, so far I've not mentioned any private person, right? This is the, so if we have a water problem and if we have a water storage problem, then where it starts. I was in Kodaikanal last year for some seminar, and inadvertently the words came out of my mouth when it took us about 40 minutes to cross about 1 kilometer and with a police escort. And I said, this is the textbook example of the failure of urban planning. There is no constraint, no limit, no enforcement, no nothing. I went to school in the Nilgiris, and it's heartbreaking for me. I went to school from the age of 5 till about 13 or 14, and I find it very difficult to go back because it's just utterly depressing to see how it has become a hodgepodge with no control, no constraint. The courts have remarked on it many times. But it's not always like that, right? So I was asked to give some examples, and I was thinking one long back and one last month. I used to live in the state of New York for 12, 15 years. And in the state of New York and the city of New York, one of the most revered people is a gentleman called Robert Moses, who drew up not just the park system for the city of New York, but also the highway and the road system beyond the Manhattan grid, the roads to get in and out of the city. And so traffic planning and management was an essential part of urban planning going back, decades and decades. Here, traffic is managed by the police. There's no department in the corporation of Madurai or Chennai that actually does traffic planning, right? It's the police that do it. And then more recently, last month, I was in Palo Alto on the west coast of the United States, and a friend of mine was trying to put in an additional room in his backyard to work as a home office. And the number of permits he had to get and the amount of approvals he had to get from the government and then from the local body, from the town. And he told me the rule is that if you're within 15 feet of the road, the government, the local body tells you what trees you can plant and what bushes can be there and what can be removed. I mean, think about urban planning at that level, the compliance and the enforcement of that. So the real issue is these are the profound structural problems in the nature of urban planning. Now we have a new problem. Now we are beset by climate change. And I must say, first of all, that if anybody doesn't believe in climate change, they just have to live in Chennai, and particularly the last 3 months. When we should have no rain, we've been having unseasonal rain. I happen to fly fairly often, and 3 times in 2 months, the planes have been diverted to Bangalore because the weather has been so bad that not just that they have to circle, but they cannot land at all before running out of fuel. This is unprecedented. I've been flying a long time. This frequency of having the airport completely shut down to traffic is unprecedented because this kind of weather is unprecedented. Then when I checked with a lot of people, they say, well, you got a problem because Chennai doesn't have this advanced guidance kind of systems where in the relatively blind, the planes can be guided down by additional data and feedback and light and all that from these landing systems. May be true, but we never had them before. And yet we never had this frequency of flight disruptions and diversions. So clearly, the weather is changing at a speed and the extremes are becoming much more frequent. We've all lived through the floods of 15, of 21, of 23. So it's real. Now the question is, what does climate change really mean for urban planning? I think what it means is that not only do you have to not worry about just 5 years or just 10 years, What used to be once in 100-year events are now happening once in 10 years. So your bandwidth or your volatility range or the scope of what you have to plan for has just expanded dramatically. And so the question really is, who plans for 5 years? Who plans for 10 years? Who plans for 20? Who plans for 50? Almost nobody. Who plans for 100? If your perspective is that, you're a culture that's 2,000 years old, and therefore you had all these water bodies that had been evolved over centuries of experience and kind of passed down knowledge, right now we're in the opposite of that. Right? In Tamil, I think there are at least 10 or 15 words for water storage bodies. There's Uthu, there's Eri, there's Kammai, there's all kinds of Anai. So there are different water storage entities meant for different purposes at different cycles. And now all of them are built, and we're basically experiencing the consequences of that. So I think, whatever the limitations or the need for improvements in urban planning were, climate change has just amplified them to a level of urgency and a level of immediacy that maybe didn't exist till now. It's not all doom and gloom, as they pointed out. There are things we can learn from the world. And I think, if I look at a few, what I would say, global lessons, I think the first is that you are going to need to have high density, high rise, multi-story buildings if you're going to have some kind of a proper ratio of living space to green space. So this notion of having sprawling cities of single-story houses or individual houses, I think, is not proven in any large metropolis around the world. The second is that you must have a real focus on water, on groundwater replenishment, and to be realistic, there must be efforts for water recycling. There is just no way that fresh water is going to satisfy 100% of the needs of a large city. There must be a focus on public transportation, and you must have some areas that are considered no-go or very little traffic if you're going to kind of make it a livable city. It is very, very difficult to retrofit old cities with new technologies, but it's not impossible. And now with the help of AI and modeling and data collection that can be very, very wide-ranging, it's possible that we can start modeling for, 50-year, 100-year events and start trying to plan for that. Overall, I would say there are examples. If you look at the city of Madurai, we have just commissioned 2 studies after many years of effort. Both of them are reaching fruition, one around underground drainage and one around stormwater management. In fact, the cost is not the limiting factor yet, in my view. In my view, the complexity is the limiting factor. There are very few people who are capable of doing these kinds of studies, even fewer who are capable of designing such systems. And as a very senior retired bureaucrat told me, he said the problem with building these kinds of stormwater systems in a place like Chennai, which gets monsoon rains, is that the complexity of gravity managed or gravity driven stormwater management for a place the size of Chennai, the engineering complexity of that is higher than the complexity of building metros, underground railways. And there are very few people who can actually execute those kinds of projects in a reasonable time with reasonable efficiency. So I think this notion of urban planning, particularly with greater volatility in weather patterns and outcomes, at the core of it has to be a profound shift away from planning for every year or every 5 years to planning for the next 50 or 100 years. The tools exist, I think, and the ability to learn from others and adapt our approach, I think, is reasonable. In our government over the last 2 or 3 years, in addition to the kinds of projects I'm talking about, where we have done granular analysis for cities of the scale of Madurai, we have also done things for the Western Ghats. In my time in the finance ministry, we set up a district master plan because we felt it needed an integrated approach. Otherwise, if we let Kuno do something different and Kotagiri do something different and Gurlu do something different, they might be racing to the bottom. So we came up with this notion, and I initiated it back in the time. And as somebody else was saying earlier in the day, we have one of the more progressive and thoughtful approaches to this. We have a Tamil Nadu Governing Council for Climate Change. I was a member in my old role. We have very renowned global experts on it, former UN members in the climate field. And so I think, this is the time to think about these things, because a state like Tamil Nadu is at 50% on its way to 75. But India as a whole, 31 is outdated, probably it's more like 35 or 40. There's a lot of room to apply these lessons ahead of time before you start building these cities, and to truly make cities that are relatively smart, unlike most of the money that has been spent so far on so-called smart cities, have not done anything really smart at all. But anyway, with those thoughts, I hope that this will be a productive discussion. I know it's a small audience, but a very interested one. And the learned judge has a lot of experience. I'm sure he's going to add a lot of insight. I thank you once again for the opportunity, and I wish you an enlightening and pleasant couple of hours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable insights. I'm sure all the points mentioned are for a greater good. So thank you so much. Now may I please request Mr. K. Chandru, retired judge, Madras High Court, and Mr. Udit Misra, associate editor, The Indian Express, to please join us on the stage for a fireside chat on resilient urban planning for vulnerable regions. Can we welcome sir with a round of applause?
I think we have around 30 minutes for the chat, sir. As many of you know, Justice Chandru was on the brink of a committee report on the illegal constructions that were happening in Nilgiris and Kodaikanal area. We just heard the keynote speech mention Nilgiris, and I think this is something that I think most of us who take vacations and go to hills, the first thought is, oh great, we can see the stars. And the next thing is that these hills are also becoming like cities, the same destruction that we see. In the last visit that I had, I found in the hills in UP that they have to buy water at 1 rupee a liter. And it just sort of made you very sad, because you go with the notion that everything is pristine, and okay, so you can discount all your city life, which is bad, but at least in the hills everything is pristine, and that notion is immediately broken, and you realize that the whole situation is very different. So we'll come to a panel discussion after this on climate change and coastal areas and coastal cities. But I wanted to take off from what Justice Chandru was on the brink of doing, which was to look at illegal constructions in vulnerable areas. And in the earlier chat we were having, when you asked, we should start by asking what are vulnerable areas. So if you could give us a brief understanding of what are vulnerable areas,
When you talk about vulnerable area, today in the context of Wayanad, we always think of the western ranges, therefore we can't forget western ranges. So there is always apprehension what will happen to the nearby areas. And the Udagamandalam and the other nearby Tamil Nadu Western Ranges are very close to Wayanad region. And therefore, there is a lot of discussion, both in the media and the social media about this. Before that, I want to tell you one thing, that before we got our independence, the British, when they administered these areas, did they really have a policy to maintain this area? In my opinion, whatever the fault, whatever the defect that we are now carrying on, is all the inheritance from their policy. I don't think they ever had a scientific policy. In fact, jocularly, it used to be said that the Forest Act never wanted to save the forest. We'll have to save the forest from the government. That seems to be the bottom line. And you know, the indiscriminate tea gardens, and you know, in Tamil Nadu, in Ooty, in Nilgiris, they even started a Cinchona plantation, which is about 3,000 acres, of producing chloroquine for a malaria drug. For a long time, the drug production came to very next to nothing. There are plastic synthetic medicines are available today, but still we continued with the Cinchona department. And we had too many regulations, too many laws relating to the region. We have a Private Forest Act, we have a Forest Act, we have a Reserve Forest Act, we have a Hill Area Development Act, we have a Municipality Act. Despite all this, one curse in this country is we have too many legislation, very little implementation. That seems to be the problem. And in this area, particularly in Nilgiris, I could even give a latest example. In 2008, somebody filed a case saying that there have been constructions without the municipal rules being followed. And then the High Court issued a notice and monitoring from 2008 onwards. And it went on like that. And later on, in 2015, it came before Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul in the bench. And he found there were 3,333 violations reported in Nilgiris alone. Leave aside Kodaikanal, is another area where. So he asked the government why you are allowing this. There have been a monitoring, there have been a prosecution notice, there has been a demolition notice, but everything is stayed because there is some appeal file, some revision file with the government, which is still pending. So he asked the government secretary how long it will take to dispose of these appeals. Then they said per month, with all the experts, we'll have 50 cases. So the judge records in his order, at this rate, it will take 3 years for the government to dispose of the appeal. So we will now appoint a monitoring committee. For Nilgiris, they appointed me, and for Kodaikanal, they appointed Justice Sampath and 2 other bureaucrats who have been part of the committee. This order was passed in August. By September, promptly, on an oral application, Supreme Court stayed it in 2015. September it was stayed. And now we are in 2024. After 8 years, Supreme Court finds why we should hear all this. We'll send it back to the High Court. It will come back to the High Court. They have also said High Court must go into the entire issue and decide the issue. We do not know what happens. Our committee, Justice Sampath, is no more. But then once Justice Kaul told me in a meeting outside, he said, because of your name, they all went to Supreme Court. My concern is it should not be left to few good individuals. It should be a systematic approach to the problem. One individual doesn't make any difference at all. And now, happily, all the buildings are still there. And the background of Wayanad, we still have the fear what is going to happen to these hill stations. This one question is which is always by. The second question I'll always see, I also was telling him just now, if you go back, say some 40 years back, there was a campaign against Silent Valley. There was an issue relating to setting up a small dam in that area. The environmental groups raised objection, including Kerala Sastra Sahitya Parishad, which led the movement. And there was also, incidentally, some lion-tailed monkey may also go off. It's a very rare species. So the slogan is monkey or man. This was a very simplified, very cruel slogan was put in even by the government. But later the environmentalists succeeded and there was no Silent Valley project. They were able to stop this. What is lacking today is we don't have such a powerful movement of the people to stop such degrading, devastating project from coming to existence. We always talk about top projects and many things like that. And therefore, when we talk about vulnerable areas, Do we have a consistent, enforceable policy? That's one issue with the state. Secondly, does the judiciary play a very constructive role in this? Because I can give 101 incidents sitting here. There is nothing like a contempt. Everything is on record. And how judiciary also did contribute to some of this faster disappearance of forests in many areas. I can give you a number of orders on this issue. And therefore, unless we feel that we have a mission that this we will hand over this world to our next generation more safe, more sustainable living conditions should be there. Unless we have such a feeling, I don't think this problem can be solved by few discussions. It has to have a concrete action to be initiated.
Thank you, sir. That shows the role of judiciary and how system, quote unquote, typically deals with many of these problems. This could have perhaps moved much further along if this disruption had not happened. But I wanted to ask you more particular about, now that you've looked at this issue for a while, the urban development pattern that you've noticed. What ails with that? What is wrong with that?
I can go back to, say, the city, urban Madras city. There was a district collector by name Chaturvedi Badrinath, an IAS officer. He became the district collector, a very small post. But he took time to analyze the Chennai city in 1971. It's a beautiful report about the Madras as a slum city. It was found for the first time 41% of the people live in slums and payments in this city. And I don't think there was any prior study that how much urban areas requires improvement. Now, once this report came up, the question came what to do with the slum dwellers. There are two types of approaches were there. One, just remove them from the city. That is from the urban planning itself. This is one approach. The second approach is you try to accommodate them, try to improve the slum. So it was not a slum clearance, but Slum Improvement Act was made in 1971. Some buildings, few buildings were constructed and some lands were being given. But the latest seems to be to remove most of the urban poor from the city to outside Chennai. It is a mass migration of the poor people who are doing very menial jobs, domestic workers, some auto, small repair shop. Hundreds of people have been removed from. There were two results were there. Multi-story buildings have been constructed in Kannagi Nagar, Edil Nagar, or in Perumbakam, and several places. There are hundreds of problems they have. But the livelihood problem of these people are not being addressed. Second main problem I found in some of the central Madras areas along the Coombe River, when people were sent to Perumbakam, I think Chennai corporations, there were 23 schools have been closed. On the contrary, in the place where they have been resettled, there is only one school. Therefore, we are not only uprooting them from the city, we are also killing the future education of these children, the livelihood of the people of the area. Therefore, in my opinion, when you talk about urban planning, with hesitation, I'll tell you that urban planning doesn't take into account poor people at all. Simply, it is edged out. There is no space for these people in this system. In fact, once there was large-scale eviction, I went to Supreme Court. I filed a bill in my own name that you can't evict them without any alternative accommodation. Initially, judges were very unhappy and they were questioning what is the accommodation that you are talking about. If you are illegal, you must send them back. In fact, there is a very crude statement. If you have come through the back door, you must send them through the back door. That kind of a thing. But at least some of the judges said the Article 21 talks about livelihood. Liberty includes livelihood, and therefore you can't have just throw them like goods. You must give them accommodation. I was very happy that I got some order and eviction was not that faster. But now I regret because when they talk about alternative accommodation, it is some 25 kilometers away, 50 kilometers away. Just live in a multi-story apartment, do whatever you want. What happened to children's education? What happened to their own livelihood? I don't think our planners have heart, their soul, and the constitutional spirit when they plan for the city. And the first impression should be that you must take into account the larger. When I said 41% in 1971, it must be more than 50% now. What do you do with these people? How do you plan for the city? This is one thing. And as Tyagarajan was pointing out, that in water bodies you build government buildings. We have a Buckingham Canal, and you have a MRTS project on the top of the Buckingham Canal. So there were some bills were filed at the time. You can't encroach into the water body. Today you will find at least half the MRT stations are on the canal itself. Now the government can violate with impunity any development rule. Then what about the ordinary people? The question will be, many people will ask. In fact, he mentioned briefly, High Court is also in a water body, correct? Now, what is the authority of the High Court now? No construction in water body. You yourself sitting there on the water body and you are giving the order. Who will believe this? So even if you want your words to ring something truth, you should be the example. It is not as if it is innocently happened. Whenever we look for a space for a court, the revenue officials will always take us to a water body only. Once they make the judiciary to violate, everybody can follow. Police, everybody can same, and then new buildings that come up. I think the best, the real problem here is we have every law that you mentioned, but we have the people who do the opposite of every legal issue that has been discussed and framed by the parliament or by the legislature. We don't respect the law in its true spirit. That is the main reason.
May I request everybody to put their phones on silent? It sort of disturbs the speaker. Okay, there are two questions that I want to follow up. One is on how regulations are sort of bypassed. But before that, just on the point that you were making, that there are so many laws and there's everybody. It would have been fun to even ask this question to a sitting minister. We are a democracy, we have all the laws, we have people living in the cities, the votes are counted. Why doesn't this get sorted within the democratic framework? Why doesn't, we have the urban local bodies law, constitutional amendments have been made. Where does it get stuck?
I can give you a small example. After my retirement, I was there in some few arbitrations. Most of the arbitration were between the flat purchasers and the building company, the real estate promoters. And when I visited some of these big companies which had built a huge condominium of 1,000 flats, 1,000 things like that, the urban planning required that along with a mega project, you got to build houses for the economically weaker section, EWS. So when I visited some of these places on inspection, I found as per the rule, they have constructed EWS flats also. In one place which is there in the city, in Chennai city, when I went, I asked them, where is the EWS? Then they said, you go around outside, come out, and then come to the other side of the building, you go there. Every flat is locked. I asked them why it is not being disposed of. And they were not initially giving any answer. Later, slowly, very reluctantly, they said, sir, we have not advertised for these flats. And later, some of the higher officials told that the people who purchase the flats in the other side, they do not want the lesser people to be in the other side. So we have kept it locked. So for the planning, the buildings are there. But the usage, it is not there. I want to even ask, I even told the minister in charge for urban development that the very essential requirement is a housing. And in the city, you find thousands of EWS flats are just closed. Not one area, everywhere the EWS flats are not sold at the interest of the other flat purchasers who have spent a lot of money. They want to have a nice place. So we ourselves perpetuate a class system where we never have a plan for the poor people. This can be, in fact, if you read social media in some smaller neighborhood papers, you'll find our own domestic workers can't use our own toilet in our house, though they clean the house. They also use our vessels, they do every work for us. But the usage of the toilet, they'll have to go to the common place, not in our own house. We have a very, very subtle class system in this country where we can't even tolerate the poor people. This reflects not only individual level, even at the planning level. When you plan a big condominium, you don't plan for the poor people around the place. This is something, I would say, a very, very class approach to the problem. That's the main reason that I feel.
Very well said, sir. And on the issue of how planning permissions or regulations are sort of bypassed, it's important to understand from you exactly how, say in the vulnerable areas, say in Nilgiris, how are these regulations bypassed? If you could share some insight on that.
These are very long story. In fact, talking about that, we had only one reported case where the previous chief minister, Jayalalitha, she was involved in a hotel project in Kodaikanal. Now, no permission was obtained, but 7 stories were built. And one conscious judge, he said, nothing doing, this should be demolished. The very curious argument was, there is no 7 stories. At each elevated level, we have 1 floor only. And the judge got angry and he said, I will issue contempt, and then the building was demolished. I don't know why the chief minister went to such a project. But then the only building which was successfully demolished was the Pleasant Stay. It became no longer pleasant for anybody to stay. But what is important was, the next day after the order, the electricity and water supply to the judge's house was disconnected. He was living in a private house outside. And then we protested in the bar, saying that this can't be done and all that. We also told the judge we will boycott the court, but he said no. He also wrote in his order, sitting in this bench, we'll have to receive brickbats and bouquets in equal equanimity. Don't get upset about this. And later, after 48 hours, it was restored. But what is important today is that the planning, is there a planning? That's one question. In fact, most of the multi-story building in Chennai, myself and Justice A.P. Shah, bench, we ordered demolition. Then they brought an amendment to regularize. That amendment was struck down. Then second amendment was brought in, that was struck down. Then it went to Supreme Court dismissed. So all this happened in 2006. Now we are in 2024. The buildings are there. Only thing is I never go there to purchase anything because the original demolition ordered by me. This is something which we'll have to, between the theory and the practice. There's a wide gap. Nobody ever questions. Today, ordinary people go to the shop because cheaper garments are available, cheaper items are available. They don't bother about the safety of the building. But once in a while, there were some safety concerns were there. So they demolished the building. That's a different issue. But today, they are standing monuments, mocking at our own law, mocking at our own enforcement system. That's a cruel stage that we are living in.
It reminds me of a cult Hindi movie, Jaane Bhi Do Yaro, which is all about, and it makes many of those arguments that you say were made in real life. Okay, now coming to the more, the tougher bit of the discussion, which is about solutions. Many of us privately know a lot of these problems, whoever has dealt with this one way or the other. Where do the solutions lie? What is your understanding? One point about the society being the way it is, that is something that perhaps require a much bigger change. I don't know where the change will come from or how, but what is your sense of where the solutions lie? What do we need to do? Do we need to change any incentive structure, for, say, the policymakers or for people? What needs to be done? If you could reflect a bit on that.
In fact, when A.R. Antule, Bombay High Court judge, was appointed to the commission, Justice Pense, in his commission report he says, cement is a concrete proof of corruption. That's there in that. Today, when it comes to construction, I do not think that we have the willpower or the moral courage to stop illegality. It's never there. The multi-story buildings have violations of 101 violations. Then they still survive. But how would they survive? You find there is also a political support. In the last previous regime, just before Jayalalitha lost her office, the last day in the office, at Janaki Ramachandran's office, 17 days he was chief minister. The housing minister signs 119 buildings regularization. We call the bill. We saw the file also. All in 2 lines, the orders. So you have, it's not as if violation take place because there are violations. There are people who patronize violation, as pointed out by Justice Pense in the Antule Commission, that cement is a concrete proof of corruption. That is the main reason why that we have so many violations in this state, and you'll have to start somewhere down the line, not just the plan, also some planners who will execute without any quid pro quo. This is something which is very, there must be a vigilant watchdog bodies should be there to see all these things happen. Most of the cases came to us through some public interest litigation. No, therefore, they had much difficulty in bringing the case, and we also had much difficulty in hearing those cases. But ultimately, the court orders are just staring at everybody. Even today, when I look into the old law reports, I feel that we have also played the same drama. I may have a good name. Oh, he only ordered demolition. But the question is, where is demolition? When I pass through that road, I find they all defy our orders. And I don't think it should be left to the hands of few individuals to decide this matter. It should be a larger...
Is this just about us not being as good a people that we can be, morality, or is there some economic incentive that you can tweak? I mean, there must be, because it can't be the case that only we are the people who are facing these troubles. Obviously, every country, every city in the world would have had these phases, and they would continue to have it today also. There must be some incremental change that can be brought about. So what are those solutions? And I'm maybe going to bug the panelists also with that question. But
no, if you see our own laws, see from Panchayat Act to Municipal Act, we have something called in between called town panchayats. Now what the explanation is that from rural to urban is a development, which itself according to me is a myth. If you say urban development, you will get all facilities, infrastructure facility. Why the same thing could not be done to the rural area? That's the question is there. Therefore, you have a false notion that this drive from rural to urban is something like a positive development. That itself is, according to me, wrong. If you think the Constitution is a basic document, everybody must get their same rights. There's nothing like the rural people are left alone and the urban people. This is one issue. Secondly, when it comes to urban, why only some cities thrive? If you take the urban planning, the Delhi capital city receives more than 40% of the planning budget, leaving aside some 60-70 cities to share the rest of the amount. There is a imbalance in the resources being there. So ultimately, the planning, if it's going to result in a decentralization and more distribution of the facilities, I can understand. But if it is going to have a more concentration and more urban concentration, and then there is a crave for coming into the city. If you ask any government servant, they all want to be in the city. It's not because of city compensatory elements. Their children get a good education, they have a transport, and then everything is much better than in a rural area. Therefore, nobody wants to go to rural. In fact, in my recent report, I mentioned 60% of the school teachers, they live in the city and then go to the rural area in the morning buses and coming. This results in a lot of absenteeism, which we are given in the... So this craze that I want to be in an urban area is a craze which is unexplainable, and therefore there must be a comprehensive solution. It's not a solution which can be only on the question of urban versus rural. More than that the planning process, I won't even quote Gandhi that India lives in villages but nobody bothers about village. And in fact, when Gandhi said the same thing, Baba Sahib Ambedkar cornered him by saying, which village you are talking about, Babuji? Because every village has got two villages. And when we took this film, Jai Bhim, we found there's a third village of the tribal settlement also, without any facility. So ultimately, the fundamental question of a human being, their right to live with dignity, has to be assured, whether it's a rural area or urban area.
It's a very potent idea, the egalitarian idea about why only bother about cities and not the whole area. On that note, I think we can bring this to a close and open it up for the panel discussion. Thank you for your insights, sir. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. That was quite an interactive session. So now, as you all are aware that we are moving forward to the panel discussion, let me introduce you to the topic. The topic stands, Is My City Taking Proactive Steps to Tackle Climate Change? On this, we would be welcoming our panelists. Right, requesting the moderator, Mr. Udit Misra, to please join us. Let us also welcome our panelists, Mr. Anshul Mishra, IAS Member Secretary, Chennai Metropolitan Development Authority. Our next panelist, Mr. Anant Maringanti, Executive Director, Hyderabad Urban Lab. Next up, let me call Mr. D. Raghunandan, Project Lead in Half Climax Chennai. And our next panelist, introducing the next panelist, Mr. Savrishi Suresh, Manager Climate Action Implementation, C40 Cities Climate Leadership Incorporation. Can we give all our 4 panelists a big round of applause? So yes, let's get started. The topic stands, Is My City Taking Proactive Steps to Tackle Climate Change? Handing it over to the moderator, Mr. Udit Misra.
Thanks a lot. And immediately I need to first apologize, without any disrespect to all the panelists and the previous speakers, for the manel that is there. Yes. We had hope for 2 women experts also, but that somehow sadly could not work out. So you have to contend, and hopefully men will step up and make sure women are not missed in the discussion. So we'll have roughly 40-45 minutes for discussion. And this is a fairly difficult topic for common and lay readers to sort of understand. So I wanted to sort of make it very simple, break it down to 2 questions each. In 2 rounds, we can go around. And then we'll open it up for the audience questions. The one thing is about climate change. What is the challenge that climate change makes and we want to focus on urbanization. So within that perspective, and in particular, because many of you are dealing with Chennai, it being a coastal city, so the vulnerability that a coastal city has because of climate change, if you could bring that out. So one is to understand what is the nature of the challenge that comes to urbanization through climate change. And the second round, we'll go around just getting your view on where the solutions might be. Because that becomes very tricky. We can often talk a lot about what the problem is and look at it from every different aspect and then still be clueless exactly what is the actionable part, what can actually make a difference. So I'll start actually with Dr. Raghunandan. No, I think because he is part of the establishment, I want to give him the last word in every round to maybe also give a view that would help us and the readers to get a better informed view. So we'll go that way. And the question is simple, as I mentioned earlier, that, if you could lay out a bit in simple terms, what is the challenge that climate change brings when we talk about urbanization?
I have what 5 minutes in the first?
Yeah, if you say 5-6 minutes each
All right.
question.
I think we've spoken a lot till now about urbanization. And as he rightly said, not enough maybe about climate change. So I think to put it very briefly, there is a problem of urbanization which we have all heard. The problems of climate change add to those problems. So it's not as if they are completely new problems. They are new problems overlaid over the pre-existing problems. And what are these new problems? I think we can discuss a lot about them, but let me just highlight 3 major, I think, new problems that climate change poses. The first is urban heat. Urban areas being concentrated areas of population, concretized structures, buildings, which absorb heat and radiate it back into the surroundings. And added to that is the modern problem of air conditioning. So the more cool you make your inside, the more heat you throw to the outside. Now, this is normal to urban areas. If you add the problem of climate change now, with an addition of 2 degrees Celsius due to climate change, on top of a pre-existing urban heat of 3 to 4 degrees, you're looking at 6 degrees plus compared to a rural hinterland. So that's one major, I think, problem that urban areas face as compared to anybody else due to climate change. The second major problem, which we are witnessing every year in every major city and town in the country, is that of urban flooding. And the urban flooding is not, again, a problem sui generis just by itself. It's been raining all the time, and heavy rains happen during the monsoon. But what's different with climate change is where during the monsoon period, over 3 months, you would have maybe 200 to 300 millimeters of rain. Today, in 2 days, you have 200 millimeters of rain or 300 millimeters of rain. That is new in climate change. No drainage system in any city of our country is designed to handle that volume of rainfall in that short a time. That again is new. Added to the problems of urbanization, which we've spoken of, we've built cities without regard to natural drainage lines. Drainage inside the city in rivers, streams, which carry the water, they have been blocked. Now, these are the problems of urbanization, but when we put this extreme rainfall on top of that, then we are adding a new layer, which I think cities across the country are finding it very difficult to cope with. And here I must say, I think Chennai, in response to the 2015 floods, has spent a lot of money in building new drainage systems, in expanding the drainage, far more than I think any other city has done. And given the existing structures, as we know, in terms of financial capabilities between the center and the states, and between states and cities, the strain on resources in handling this problem, I think, is an issue that needs to be tackled going forward, because with climate change, this problem is only going to get worse in this. The last problem I would speak of is transport and the issue of public transport. It looks as if, on the face of it, if we talk about public transport, this applies to all cities under normal circumstances as well. But I think the layer that climate change adds on top of that is, especially in the context of Chennai now and a few other bold cities which have set themselves targets to reduce emissions and so on, is how do you reduce emissions while multiplying private vehicles compared to public transport? So you've got a bus which can carry 50 people, but instead of that, you've got 50 cars taking 50 people and adding to emissions, adding to heat, etc., which again, in the context of climate change, is adding to the problem of heat, adding to the problem of emissions, and adding to the problem of climate change, which we have. I don't know whether I have a minute or more. If I have a minute more, I think compared to all these other problems that I said, one additional problem which Chennai and other coastal cities face because of climate change is sea level rise and coastal erosion. And that is a major problem. There is a website that any of you may like to visit by this international NGO called Climate Central, which is a think tank. They've studied this issue in detail. You can look at that, and it has animated maps which you can click, and it will show you Chennai as it stands today, and it will show you an animated picture of Chennai going up to 2050 and showing you which parts of the city are going to get inundated by the sea level rise. Imagine if sea level is 1 meter more than it is now, It's not just going to rise vertically, it's going to come in to the city. And climate central maps show you that all major coastal cities in this country, Chennai, Kochi, especially on the Bay of Bengal side, Puri, etc., are going to suffer massive inundation. And this is something that I think we are sleepwalking through in our country, because we are just there, we are building structures, making buildings, building highways, roads, all kinds of structures. No, somewhere at the back of the mind, we should know that maybe in 10 years' time, the sea is going to come and swallow up all this. And this is a huge additional problem that I think we have to deal with.
Thank you. Dr. Anand, in particular, I would like you to speak a bit on the climate justice bit and your view on the challenges.
Thank you. I really don't have to really struggle a lot to do that, because I think the issue of climate change and its challenges is basically a question of who's asking the question and who is seeing the challenge. If you are someone who sells air conditioners, then I think climate change as manifested through heat is a fantastic opportunity, right? I mean, that the market is increasing. So what's the big challenge there? I mean, the challenge is basically to sell as many, produce as many, and that's the challenge, right? Other than that, there's nothing more to it. I think the thing that we will have to step back a moment and think about is this question of whether heat, flooding, sea rise level are manifestations of some deeper problems, or are they actually the problems themselves? And I think that it's sometimes useful to be really unreconstructed, old-style structuralist, Marxist type economists and ask this question: what is the underlying problem here? And I think the underlying problem very often is that we have a variety of ways of thinking about the science of climate change, but fundamentally what you have here is intention to do something about it, but no institutional capacity. Zero institutional capacity, which has become very evident in the last 30 years. So big challenge for us is going to be, how do we build the institutions that can actually deal with this, right? And I think that that's a really big challenge, simply because our urban governance over the last 40, 50, 60, 70 years has treated the urban space as a flat terrain which is completely filled with real estate and property. And in that flat terrain, we have engineering jurisdictions and political jurisdictions which don't match with each other to start with. But you don't even have any kind of a governance structure that can deal with a watershed. You don't have a governance institution that can deal with the larger urban region itself. I know in 1908, we had the biggest flood in Hyderabad known. Right? And soon after that, there was a report written by Mokshagundam Visvesvaraya in which he says that, look, you have a city in which in 748 square miles, you have 800 water bodies, one in each square mile. And they're all organized at a different contour level. So you have the top chain breaking, then the next one breaks, then the next one breaks, and the next one breaks. And that's what you had on September 28th, 1908. And we have had that happening again since 2000, and then subsequently year after year after year we have had that in Hyderabad, right? What has happened? Essentially what has happened is that in the last 20, 30 years, a tremendous amount of urbanization has taken place in terms of, not in terms of demographics, right? We often tend to make this very silly mistake of thinking that urbanization is about 70% of male main workers getting out of agriculture. But that's not what this is. This is really about land use changing. Land use changing, land becoming property, and therefore you stop thinking of land as a productive asset. You think of it as something on which logics of efficiency of service delivery have to be organized. Therefore, what happens is your ethics of how do you manage these ecological commons is gone. So all older ecological commons that come from an agrarian background turn into government institutions, right? everywhere, start from Delhi all the way down to Trivandrum. You have all of the established properties of landowners in the agrarian setup. Land use conversion, it turns into apartments. And then you have the actual water bodies that turn into slums. That's what happens everywhere. Because those are the only lands that are available to them. Nothing else is available to them. So you have now a problem in which nobody can be held accountable for anything because everybody is involved in the game. So the way to do this, I think, is to move away from this problem of climate change being easily sucked up into problems of property battles and start thinking seriously about land use. Land use in terms of what kinds of values are we thinking about. Urban planning has to be about values, assigning particular types of values to land and not simply in terms of the exchange value. That's the most important thing. The second thing that we need to do really is think in terms of what materials are we talking about, right? I mean, the heat in informal settlements, we often come up with these strange solutions that people should stay indoors under heat wave conditions. Staying inside an informal settlement under heat wave conditions is getting cooked. We have put up temperature and humidity loggers in 40 houses and modeled everything, and we know what's going on. The walls are too thin, the roof is too low, and inside is horrible, which is the reason why you see in all those informal settlements, women are sitting on the threshold everywhere, or they go and sit under the tree. Now that gives you the clue, right? If we don't therefore change our methods, if we don't change our data, if we don't get our institutions right, we have very serious challenges which we don't even know how to define. Thanks.
Fantastic. Sabarish, you come from C40, which is now apparently C97. But give us some understanding also from an international perspective and what's happening in the rest of the country on the kind of challenges.
Right. I think when it comes to the kind of aspiration for cities to be climate resilient, it's become more of a need rather than just an aspiration, right? Because you start to see most of these instances happening to you, and therefore you, as a response to this, you've started to respond to some of these challenges. And as Dr. Raghunath was also mentioning, climate change talks about two specific variables. One is precipitation, which is rainfall. Two is basically the thermal instance, which is basically the increase in temperature. Now, what has actually happened because of climate change is that both intensity and the frequency of it has increased. It's not that we didn't have floods before 2000, but the rate at which some of these instances are happening is becoming a day-to-day event, right? So 2015 we had one, 2017 we had one, 2023, and what it states, the global report from IPCC, which is the assessment report, talks about these instances going to increase over a period of time. So now there is an imminent need for cities to kind of look at this exercise. And what we do at C40 is to support cities to first build the evidence that's required. Let's say we want to become carbon neutral, right? But we need to understand how much are we emitting at the first go, right? And let's say if we want to also start looking at implementing projects, now where do we implement? Where do we have the maximum emphasis on that? So what we provide at C40 is to try and look at this exercise and supplement them with the technical assistance to do so. Now, for the city of Chennai, it has been a city, we have a membership from 2016. And last year, we launched the Chennai City Climate Action Plan. And coincidentally, it also goes along with your, the vision for the city talks about it being proactive and also being water balance as a city by 2050. So which means that it at least aspires to become carbon neutral by 2050 and also to look at the water problem, right? Chennai's morphology and the kind of geographical setting that we have is very interesting because the first 6 months, you have enough amount of water. and the next 6 months you don't really have water at all. So the issue is about how do you manage this, the kind of rainfall that you get. How do you store this? How do you use it in a manner that you can have that sort of the excess supply that we run through the entire year? So, and if you look into the action plan, it also not just talks about, some of these areas. There are about 180 odd actions. And among that, it's also across 6 different sectors, from energy to waste management, to transportation, to urban planning, biodiversity, and so on. But the success of this, I mean, as we work towards implementation from June, we've started to look at different impact areas and how we can support. And I'm sure Anshul sir will also be talking about the master planning exercise that we're trying to support it. What we intend to do is to also come up with the kind of evidence building that's necessary, right? What institutions also believe is that if there is an evidence or a proof of concept which states that it will help you to move in those directions, that creates for you to implement those actions. For example, let's say Chennai wants to look at a rooftop solar policy. Now, what kind of levers do they exist? Are there policy level challenges? Are there regulatory challenges that exist? And if they can be tweaked, is there a better way of adoption? And when this is combined with, a capacity building and the kind of education awareness that's required among people, the adoption becomes easier. So I think this is the area that we're trying to sort of support too.
Thanks, Ron. So, Mr. Mishra, so glad that somebody from the government is here to sort of explain, because this is often not, most of journalism was also about what the government didn't do. But I wanted to ask you first, you're holding a portfolio where you're looking at these problems in the most detailed manner. So if you could explain to our, the audience here and to the wider audience, what is the nature of the challenge as you see it? That would go a long way in sort of setting it up.
Thank you for inviting me for this event. One thing I want to say at the outset is that climate change as a problem, we have been hearing about this for long, but any concrete action in identifying the problem exactly what it is a recent development. And even if we identify the problem, many solutions are not available as such. And given the extreme weather conditions, which was mentioned earlier, actually planners are clueless how to handle such extreme weather conditions, because planning can be for maximum for 20 years as per master plan norms. But the extreme weather conditions such as heavy rains, heavy downpour happening within 3-4 years or 5 years is such a difficult situation to handle. Anyway, the problem is very complex, and not only the climate change, but entire urban planning itself has been discussed of late. I remember when we were working as commissioners of corporations, genuine scheme came in. First time there was a discussion on resource allocation and making things better in urban areas. Before that, there was no discussion. So we actually started late. So we are now doing the catch-up game. That is the problem, first of all. Now, since we understand the magnitude of the problem, we have to identify what are the areas where it is manifesting and how we can, handle that. In master plan, we are first time in third master plan we are preparing. So we are trying to collect evidence through various studies about, for example, heat island effect. We are studying that. Then there's a flood mapping exercise for the entire Chennai metropolitan area, including 3 river basins, which is being done by JICA now, and we are part of that. So, to map the water course, flows, the connectivity and how it is causing flood and what are the issues in terms of drainage of water. So based on that, we are preparing micro and macro drainage plans, and that will be implemented. Part of it is being done by GCC at present, but GCC is just one part of entire CMA area. Where water basin, these river basins are originating far, far away. So the entire, say for example, 1,189 square kilometer area of Chennai metropolitan city, that is to be planned completely in integration with what GCC is doing. That one is going on. Then we are also doing climate action plan for entire CMA. First, now it has been done for GCC, but now we are extending it to the entire CMA, and C40 is helping us with that. Apart from that, we are also first time doing a study on blue-green infrastructure. So it's not just water, it's also about how much green you have in the city and how much more green areas you can create, and how you can protect the existing green ones. So as we know that over the course of time, as urbanization has happened and more buildings have come in, we have lost green areas and we have lost blue areas, that is water areas also. How it happened, sir was explaining, Justice Chandru sir was explaining how it happened over the 20, 30 years, 40 years, and last 4 or 5 decades. It was unfortunate, but now whatever is in hand, we can try and protect that. So we are working on that plan, and we are also working on river-based planning. So essentially, it means that first of all, we ensure that there is no further encroachment on the rivers, and for that matter, lakes also. So we are coming up with comprehensive lake rejuvenation plans. Secondly, how to regulate the development in the influence zone, that is, say, 500 meters beyond the river line. What kind of regulations we can have so that we can prevent flooding in those areas. So this work is going on, and we are shortly submitting the regulations part and the policy part to the government for further examination. So that is happening on the other side. The entire climate action plan has to be integrated in the third master plan so that it informs all the other studies. We are doing 26 studies to collect evidences for preparing master plan 3. This is first time it is happening, evidence-based master planning we are emphasizing, and we are also emphasizing on participatory approach. First time we created a vision for third master plan and vision for the Chennai metropolitan area, where it does talk about resilience, it does talk about sustainability, and with around 50,000 people participated in various stakeholder programs, online and offline both. And we have collected a lot of inputs, which will go as very critical inputs in the preparation of third master plan.
So I wanted to ask you about, the trade-offs that you sort of see. You are in this unique position where you're seeing, okay, if we do this, it will solve this solution. It will get us to this point, but we will have a problem of this nature. If you could reflect a bit on also the kind of trade-offs that you see. Okay, I'm doing this. This is fantastic. Under normal circumstances, this would have been fabulous, but now I have another problem, and that in the climate.
So thank you for asking that question. So one thing which I want to caution is that it is not urbanization versus climate. There is a possibility of sustainable growth, sustainable urban growth, and we should look for it because we can't prevent it. Urbanization will happen. You can't prevent it. And in fact, I would beg Sir's permission to differ from him in one thought. India has been a country of villages. But it is moving towards urban areas. And let us be very clear on that. Urban areas are not a craze. It is a result of economics of the place, and it is the market dynamics which comes into being, and it gives employment to all those people who are either unemployed in the rural areas or they are underemployed or hidden unemployment and all that. And agriculture compared to secondary and tertiary activities, economic activities, is not that productive. So in most of the countries, it has happened. It is not for the first time in this country is happening. Most of the countries have, migrated from agriculture to secondary to tertiary, not in terms of complete migration, but large labor forces have shifted. So there is a very deep economics in this thing. And fortunately, unfortunately, it is the urban areas which are driving this because of agglomeration effect. So if this urban planning, these concepts are now only being discussed. I don't think 10 years back this was even being discussed. So how to manage this if it is coming as a problem in urban areas is the question before us. Now, urban planners, traditional schools have not been thinking about economic development as one of the part of urbanization. First time we are conducting sustainable economic growth strategy study for CMA. For any city in country, Chennai is doing it for the first time. So we will understand what is driving urbanization process in Chennai, what is needed, and how it can be made equitable. For example, anybody who comes to city needs two things. One, he needs a work or job, so workplace. Second, he or she needs a place to stay. Now, how do you manage these two places in space so that it is most efficient? Now, as I was saying that slums were cleared and the slum dwellers were shifted outside, it's a very big problem, and it should not have happened that way had the planners thought about the economics of the thing. Now, my job is here. If you are pushing me 30 kilometers away, what will happen to my livelihood? So, the poor or anybody in the city who is living has a right to be near the workplace so that they can easily commute every day and they don't have to spend resources and time and money to commute for every day. So that is the economics which needs to be worked out. This is not only for poor, for everybody, you, me, or anybody. I take 45 minutes to travel from my workplace, my flat in Narkundram, to my office, and I use a car because public transportation is not available. Even if it is available, there is last mile connectivity problem. So transportation comes in as a very important factor in creating more efficient economies in the cities. That actually also relates to the climate change plan, the climate change problem. So if you have something like, there's a new concept called transit-oriented corridor, new for India, but it has already been implemented elsewhere, including Hong Kong, Tokyo, Seoul, and Singapore, and many Western countries, where they concentrate development along the transit corridors. And transit corridors will have public transit like metro or any bus system, which makes it more efficient for anybody to live there and take a public transport and go to workplace. So that is how we need to plan. And fortunately, it was announced 2 years back to work with the FSI so that we can give more FSI along the transit corridors so that the development concentrates along this. And it reduces pressure on the other areas in the city where people go and live, and because there is no public transportation available, they use their private vehicles, which is causing a lot of congestion, issues of productivity. It is increasing trip length, it is increasing transportation cost, and it is also increasing overall pollution, overall vehicular emission also, so which is leading to climate change. So this urban sprawl, which we have allowed as traditional school of planning, should have been curtailed, and instead we should have gone for more efficient, compact cities with proper densification. So that is a solution which can be thought of.
Oh, yeah, fantastic points. So let's revisit the same thing now from the solutions perspective on what you think should be done. And I'm just throwing it out there. Should a lay reader might ask, or a audience might ask, should we start thinking in terms of having absolutely new cities? Okay, you cannot, like Dr. Tyagarajan was saying, there's only so much you can do with Madurai. So do you fundamentally need to rethink newer cities and say, okay, there's only so much you can do with old cities? Or where do the solutions lie? Please take a stab at it.
So let me frame my response like this. Firstly, I think if we start from an urbanization perspective, and what Justice Chandru was talking about, there are so many things that are going wrong, which result in problems of overheating, not just in terms of temperature, but in terms of our ecology and the way we live. That, I don't know if you know, in the early days of the climate struggles on the streets at the Copenhagen Climate Summit, there were these protesters outside, 100,000 people, with a huge banner which said, "System change, not climate change," by which they meant the only way to fight climate change is to throw this all out and have a new system. As far as I'm concerned, that's beyond me. Okay, that's above my pay grade. I don't think I'm capable of changing the whole system there. There are things which are desirable to do, but I'm not sure that I can go there, like let's have completely new cities or like that. So let me frame my answer to what I think are, in the given context, what are practically possible things to do. Because it's easy to, it's one thing to think in terms of changing the whole system, but let's not make the best the enemy of the good. And let's see what can be done. So from that point of view, I'd like to pose three possible solutions, if you like. And I'll say solutions within quotes, because there are some things that we can do, which I will pose as low-hanging fruit, something that you can pluck and eat today. I'll focus on three possibilities. First, as I said, was the problem of heat. I think the problem of heat is something that you can tackle because it's a man-made problem. It has known reasons for doing it. It's a lot of waste heat. There's the urban heat island because of concretization and a loss of green spaces. These are things which are not completely impossible to tackle. Concretization can be lowered, green areas in the city can be increased, and heat can be reduced. That's like waste heat thrown out. And I'll give you one small example, or maybe big example. 50% of the power consumed in all major cities is consumed for air conditioning. That's a huge amount. In a city like Chennai, that means 50% of coal being burnt is because of that. And air conditioning is also highly inequitable heat generation. The richer people generate the heat, but the poorer people living in crowded, poorly ventilated, informal settlements suffer the worst. Those who are working outdoors, etc., are suffering the worst. That can be tackled in a variety of ways, but a key method is to reduce the amount of heat generated from the air conditioners by ensuring that energy efficient air conditioners are used, number one. And number two, everybody now runs their air conditioners using remote. You just sit there and what people love to do is in the peak of summer to reduce the air conditioning temperature to 20 degrees Celsius and cover themselves with a blanket at night and feel great about it. Many countries around the world have tried this out. It's been tried in Shanghai, in Seoul, in Tokyo, and other places where the government has mandated as a rule. You can't do it for individual houses, but commercial establishments, malls, cinema houses, shops, government offices, you put a minimum, say you cannot run your ACs below 25 degrees Celsius. Believe me, it makes no difference. If you didn't know what temperature was here in the hall, you would still feel comfortable. I live in Delhi, and we had temperatures of 48 degrees plus. And I have never used my air conditioner at home at temperatures lower than 28 Celsius. And my bills came down by 20%. So the slogan I sort of quote is, you save energy, you save money, and save the planet. Because all three things are happening. You reduce heat, you reduce the heat you throw out, I reduce my bills. I'm not asking for big sacrifices, but these are things that can be done. I've been talking about this for many years, but this year the Power Ministry of the Union government has actually issued a circular saying we are seriously considering mandating this potential, and this is something that can be done by people. So that's one. I'll add one more thing on the problem of heat, which is relevant to Chennai. Everywhere we have heat, in Delhi, in Haryana, in Jodhpur, Jaipur, everywhere. In Chennai, you have the additional problem of humidity. So while it is 38 degrees in temperature, if you have 60% humidity in Chennai, it feels like 42, 43 degrees Celsius. In Chennai now, with average temperatures being high because of climate change, extra 2 degrees, you add an extra 3 degrees because of humidity, you are coming close to temperatures of about 40 degrees Celsius equivalent, which the World Health Organization has said it is now the limit of survivability. I'll underline that. You're coming close to where the human body cannot take more heat. And that is a serious problem, which means you must act to lower urban heat in whichever ways possible. Mr. Anshul Mishra has talked about greening. It'll be great to see that happen. The air conditioning problem and other measures to reduce heat. That's one. The second thing I would add is on this issue of greening. Greening overall terms in the city, yes. But there is also in many Indian cities the problem of greening being associated with gentrification. You get nice middle class colonies with nice parks, but you get the poor with nothing there. And they're still, like he says, sitting outside to get what little breeze you can. So it's important to ensure equitable access to green areas and water bodies, as much for the poor as for anybody else. Here again, the European Union, for example, UN Habitat, for example, has a norm that everyone from their place of residence should be able to access a green area within 400 meters. And that's an important criteria to build into master planning processes, etc. So I'll add that. The third point I'd like to add is on buildings. We make our buildings increasingly these days in cities especially, where you require a huge amount of cooling to be able to live in that. Livability means artificial cooling, because the way we build our house with concrete and cement and glass and so on makes it necessary for us to do artificial cooling. Government has over the years evolved codes, building codes. You've now got energy efficient building codes for residential buildings. It's called the Eco Nivas Samhita, which has been notified, but it is not mandated. The new government, the first act it did was to announce this huge building program of 10 million houses under PM Awas Yojana program. Why do we not move for making this mandatory? Let the government take it upon itself, when it is building these houses anyway, to build them using energy efficient building codes, which will reduce the need for air conditioning by close to 20% to 30%. The problem today is any new building which is made today, you're locking in the carbon which that building is going to use for the next 50 years. Because I'm not going to build a house every 5 years or 10 years. If I buy a house today, it's with me for 50 years. So every building we made today is going to last long, which means I must spend that much more on cooling of that house for the next 50. Everybody loses. Whereas if the building is made in an energy efficient manner, with appropriate building materials, designs, all of which are present in the Eco Nivas Samhita, that will make a huge difference. So these are, I think, 3 low-hanging fruit that I'm talking about. And the fourth, I've mentioned this once before, Mr. Anshul Mishra has referred it again, is the issue of transport. See, look, apart from the unplanned nature of our cities and the way it has gone, our cities are today built and the roads are built. If you look at the amount of roads we have and the vehicles, compared to even many Western cities, the proportion is highly distorted. We have more cars, more vehicles, less people being transported. Our cities and the roads are not built for moving people. They are built for moving cars. And that means that many more vehicles, that much fewer people traveling, and public transport has today become a huge requirement. The amount of overcrowding you see in all the cities is not just overcrowding for the cars. What about the people who have to travel and that? Public transport is the biggest, I think, one of the biggest solutions for equity, which will simultaneously tackle problems of air pollution and of climate change. So 4 low-hanging fruit, which I think can be tackled.
Dr. Anant, your take on solutions.
Okay. I'll respond to this also by actually talking about 4 different kinds of actors. One is the government. The second is what I broadly think of as the knowledge producing community, the researchers, the scholars, all of those people. The third is the market actors, and the fourth is the community, which is the big elephant in the room that nobody ever talks about. What do people know? What do they think? What do they do? So to start with the government, I'll say all of this with the caveat that the government, the research community, the civil society, the political actors, the community, none of them is a homogeneous thing. It's extremely widely varied. So I'm just going to make some top level comments. I think number one, I would start by remembering what an Australian planner friend of mine always used to say, that a government can outsource everything but not intelligence. The moment you outsource your intelligence, you've actually messed up with the whole system, right? And I think that in the last 30 years, that's one of the things that a lot of governments have actually done. So you don't have an internal capacity to deal with things. So if we stick with that, we assume that we do have the intelligence, what do I expect the government to do? I think number one, we will have to rethink our planning knowledge systems completely. We cannot plan our cities any longer as only efficiency of services or even planning for generating more and more dynamic markets. I think the plans now will have to do a lot more, because what we have done historically is to actually leave out a whole lot of things outside of planning, right? So our cities survived not because of planning, but because we left out a lot of things outside of planning, right? Planning basically dealt with land use control, and that they were never actually able to do because of the variety of reasons. So you have a situation now where we're trying to step into everything. I think planning will have to be a lot more humble, recognize that planners are able to facilitate a few things and not control and regulate everything. Once you do that, a lot of opportunities open up, right? You can think in terms of what Barcelona has done, which is in terms of thinking about urban acupuncture, that is try and do something very small, smart in one place, let it radiate out and have an effect somewhere else. And I think that if you actually strategically locate these kinds of interventions across the city, then they will actually add up. And they will actually facilitate a lot of very interesting experimentation to happen. I think we need to get our institutions right. And those institutions will have to learn to think in terms of an ethical framework. And that I think is a very, very big challenge, because our institutions have never been built around ethics. Climate change, if it challenges us to think about anything at all, it's ethics. And it pushes us to think about ethics in an extremely urgent manner, right? Now, with that, I'll move into the question of what should researchers do. I think what researchers have also been not getting right in the last 30 years is this question of ethics. What should I be researching? Why should I be researching it? In what ways should I be researching it? I don't think that a lot of research knowledge that we produce is actually enabling anybody to do anything. We just do things because we are producing some kind of an internal markets of our own in which we are the players and we are the regulators, right? And I think that has to break. We will have to be accountable to governments and say that, look, here is what I have to tell you, which is what you're calling evidence-based research. That is, I tell you that, look, this is what it is, and I'm going to demand an accountability from you to this data that I'm producing, right? But that also means then that you're accountable to the communities. Because a lot of things that happen in our cities have actually been done by the people themselves. I mean, when I said that a woman sits on the threshold of a house or goes to the nearest tree, so many women living in so many slums constantly building small shrines and temples and so on. They're not building it just to occupy land. They're building it because they're creating public spaces for themselves. That's where they go and hang out, right? They're doing this all the time. They're very, very inventive. And I think we need to really think about how they do that. A lot of building in our cities is not done by architects and planners. It's done by mestris, the masons. And we don't know how they actually think. Most architects don't have any idea how a mason thinks, right? That's the thing that we'll have to think about. And in doing so, we really need to make it possible for people who work with material sciences to work with anthropologists, and for anthropologists to be able to work with engineers. And that's the kind of knowledge that has to be produced in knowledge. And that's something that climate change is pushing us to do, right? Third, I said markets. And I think that markets are actually a lot more intelligent than what they look like, right? We think that markets are constantly greedy and they're doing all the time. They don't. I mean, look at the way in which markets have refused to get into slum redevelopment work. They just don't, because they don't see it working, right? Most of the time it just doesn't work, right? Now, the thing is that what that is telling us is that there is something else going on there. People are building for themselves. They're not going away, right? And that is where we need to figure out what can the government and the market together create actually as a possibility for people to do for themselves, right? We try and offer a cool roof as white painting on all Pakka houses, and it doesn't work because Pakka houses don't improve a whole lot with cool roofs. Kacha houses with a heat insulated roof are going to improve tremendously in their thermal performance. And that is something that the researchers are not telling very powerfully. Governments are not listening to it because they're not even interested in that. And the markets are not interested in it because they don't see any opportunity there, right? And that's where I think we have a serious problem. That's the problem with the markets, right? We need to think about what it is that they're interested in, what are the opportunities that they'll go for, and how do you work with them. That leaves us with the communities. I think over a period of time, broadly, one of the most unfortunate things that has happened with communities is that we have treated them as people who are recipients of knowledge, recipients of wisdom that comes from us, whether it is the government or the researchers or the markets, everybody is lecturing them. And I think that we should just stop doing that. They know what they're doing. If you keep lecturing them too much, then they will just shut you off completely and they do what they have to do. But if they listen to them carefully, then people are actually capable of telling you what needs to be done. And lots of very interesting and important things. Thematically, all of this, I'll just close with this. To me, at this point of time, for the last many years, one of the things that I have been so completely concerned about is this issue of wetlands in our cities. We don't understand wetness. We understand precipitation, but we don't understand wetness. Look at Mumbai, look at Chennai, look at any town in anywhere in South India. Your walls have what is called sealant in Hindi. Where does that sealant come from? It's wetness, right? It causes huge health problems and we don't understand it, right? I think it's really important for us to think about wetness, wetlands, humidity, moisture, things like that in our cities, and we have to figure out how to bring that into our planning systems. Problem often is that because our planning is so completely focused on drawing rigid boundaries, and it doesn't understand a wetland, which has a very fluid boundary, right? It keeps expanding, contracting, and that makes you feel very uneasy because what do you do with something that is expanding and contracting? I need a clear boundary. So every water body now has a ring burned around it. It has essentially killed your littoral zone. And once you've killed the littoral zone, your migratory birds stop coming because there's no food available for them. And just sitting there and wondering why you're getting a flood. Of course, you're going to get flooding. And I think that flood is the one that you're saying, what is caused by climate change and what is caused by us. This flood is not because of climate change. This flood is not because of extreme precipitation. This flood is because we have ring-burned our tanks. We have concretized everything. We have not left any room for sponginess in our land. That's what the problem is.
Thanks a lot. Sabrish,
your question on do we need to just completely look at new cities, right?
That was just a suggestion, and also because two people have spoken, say on a coastal city, the water level rising. I mean, where is the solution to that? Is there even a solution to that? And somebody who's not lived like me, who's never lived in a coastal city, can't even fathom exactly what it means. And maybe I'll bother you again with that question.
So I think, in for example, in Chennai, you have a good amount of evidence that actually talks about areas that get inundated with every rainfall during the monsoon. However, you see that there is a lot of willingness to buy properties at that place, right? While there is evidence, and there is also a good amount of local knowledge stating that okay, there are some specific areas in the city, let's say for example Velicheri, right, where there is an instance of flooding that happens almost every year, but you still go, right? So there is this market which is also trying to give you some sort of a notion of reduced price to that particular flat, and you go buy for it. For you, it's more important that you own a home in Chennai rather than thinking about that you don't really have a property per se. So that is a risk that I think some people are still willing to take. But what has happened is that, and then come back and say that, the government is not doing this. So that kind of accountability needs to be brought in. And not often than not, I've also seen that, especially if you don't really get the messaging in the right place.
By accountability, you mean the regulatory?
No, not the regulatory side of it. It's more the decision that you are willing to take, right? So it's the risk quotient that you're willing to still take, even though there is evidence. And secondly, I think while we talk too much about the potential for looking at the greater cost of climate change and so on, how am I reducing emissions, and the whole Gen Z generation is so much bothered to act upon it. I think the biggest criteria which will still relate to a lot of the masses is if you can explain the business case behind it. Like what Mr. Raghunath was also saying, that if your house has a scenario in which that you don't really have to pay your electricity bills. Let's say 50% of your electricity bills has been met through solar, and there are enough incentives that are being provided by the government. The recently announced Har Ghar Surya Yojana talks about that, like where you're incentivizing at least 50% of the capital cost. So if you're able to talk about the terms in which that people understand, especially finances, then the uptake for all of this becomes much more easier. And the same case with livelihood as well. And I mean, as rightly put, there were cases where we went to some of the coastal districts like Nagapattinam to, try and understand how is climate change impacting them. Now, they themselves are adapting. You don't really need to build or lecture them about what needs to be done or asking them to move away from those specific areas. They're fishermen, right? I mean, the only livelihood that they basically know is to actually fish. Alternate livelihoods, you could still try, build capacity and so, but the idea of or the emotion of association with the sea is always there. So the fact is that you need to start thinking about alternative livelihoods within that, and I'll be doing it. When the fish catch is low, they're trying to look at prawn or other aquaculture, the other means of livelihood that is actually available to them. So I think the idea of any successful plan, and that's what we still keep talking about, the implementation of the climate action plan, is you need to get the messaging right. And then the adoption becomes much more easier, because there is a clear case for why it will benefit you, but somehow it is not taken up to scale. And you need to show that. And that's what we start by doing a couple of pilot projects. We're trying to do that with a couple of government buildings to start with. Because the adoption is much more easier, and you can demonstrate that, hey, this is a use case where you are able to demonstrate that 50% of your energy bills are being saved. So why don't you do it at your place too? So I think that needs to, percolate in the larger scale.
Fantastic point. So, I'm sure in your daily work, you would have many things that you would want to say that if only we could do this, or, the next stage should be that. It may not be on paper, it may not yet be, but, share with us I'm asking you that question most humbly, that share with us that aspect of solutions that you think, I see this every day. The current system is, because you've spoken a fair bit about what you're already doing, the institution is already doing. What is the future for these solutions? Where do you see? Just reflect a bit more on that.
I'm a very positive person, so I always believe that if there are challenges, we can always find solutions. And there's no need to panic on this. Most of the cities of the world have been seeing these kind of things, and they have been, inventing themselves to handle these problems, and very often use terms of resilience, adaptation, and mitigation are, the mantras for handling climate change. I'll come to the new city issue also, but here, in the given situation today, which we are in, most of the cities are in, I would say, the per capita energy consumption is very low in India compared to the countries of the West. So this all, this panicking about everything is going to, it's doomsday or something like that, or everything is going to get flooded and all those things are going to happen. It is, we have to, be a little cautious about that. Having said that, the problem is real. There's no denying the fact. And we need to start working on this right now. Even though we are late, we still can, we are late in the, economic growth and economic development also. So it is actually, we are in a better position to handle these situations compared to the Western world. And we, as I was saying that, we need to collect evidences of what is happening as usual situation, what is happening, and we don't do anything, it will happen, and try to mitigate those. So there are various strategies which we are working, as I told you, we're working on it. And since the problem is very complex, the solution also has to be very, very comprehensive. And, obviously the solution has to be context specific. Given in Chennai's context, it is a low-lying, low altitude area, and flood becomes a problem because of the tidal effect. So that is a challenge which we have to face. JICA, in their study, they have given many recommendations which seem feasible, and we are working on it. Now, the next challenge would be how to implement that. As Sir was also saying that we have ideas and plans, but how to implement that. Now, like every other city or every other government, we also face the challenge of having a robust implementation plan. The master plan 1 and 2, like any other plan in any other city, I can challenge for that. No plans have prepared an implementation plan. An implementation plan is basically an investment plan which has to be prepared in terms of what real projects you are going to do to implement the plan. Now, even if you say that, okay, this department has to do this department has to do this, where are the resources? And even if resources are there, what is the guarantee that the department will not change its priority in next few years? So that is a very big challenge. So first time we are suggesting this, that this third master plan will have a very robust implementation plan, department-wise, project-wise, with tied funding from the budget. And it will be monitored in none other than the chief secretary level higher rank officer through a steering committee. That is the way to go. I think that is possible. Because challenge always has been this coordination, and we prepare the master plan, then CMDA sits back. There is no power with CMDA to ensure that implementation is done. Similar is with all the other cities in the country. They don't have any power to implement that unless power has been given. And often I think some of the development authorities are doing much better in terms of controlling the overall, development. So having said that, one more thing which is required is to enhance the capacity of the planners, planning bodies, and the other departments also. So that also we thought about, and we are doing some exercise on that. In fact, Niti Aayog has given a report, and they say that every 30,000 population, you need one planner. But conservatively, now we are looking at every 1 lakh population, one planner. Okay, even if that happens, that will be a good thing. So we decided, government of Tamil Nadu decided that we will fund a B-plan course in Anna University, a school of architecture and planning. And every year, now we started that. Now the third year, which is third year students have come in to create an ecosystem and create a pool of planners who understand these problems and train them well so that tomorrow they become planners in government or in private sector and they can understand this issue. So coming to your issue also of capacity building and this training is very important, which is missing. And most of the urban planning initiatives and projects have been driven by civil engineers. I'm not taking away anything from them. The engineers have done great work, but the planning is a very different technical exercise. It requires a different skill set. And it is always looking in the future, not in the near future, but far in the future. So that is another challenge which we need to address, and coordination among various departments, capacity building, training, and then finding the real solutions and to implement them. These are the things which we need to focus on.
On the city, absolutely.
So on that, there is a discussion among urban planners and experts that new cities, so-called satellite cities, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. New cities such as Chandigarh has actually not worked. Many people would feel why I'm
doing
saying
a
that.
session on the same thing in Chandigarh.
So it's an economically dead city, basically. It is running because it is headquarter for 3 states or whatever. So if you don't have that underlying economics in running the city, the factors are not available, then you cannot have a vibrant city. You can create infrastructure, but people would not live there. So that is a bigger challenge. So for that, what we are trying to do is we are trying to identify growth centers around Chennai in the periphery. And we have identified 6 such centers, which are basically existing, small towns or, clusters where we are trying to go and plan it better so that it doesn't, convert into urban sprawl like Chennai has become. So we are having Minjur, in Tirumalai, we are having one place near Tiruvallur. Then you have Chengalpet, Kanchipuram, and Mamallapuram. So these 4 towns, anyway, 3 towns already existing. So we are going to, plan around that. These are small towns, maybe 30 square kilometer, 20 square kilometer. We are taking larger area and we are preparing master plan for those 6 cities, which can act as satellite cities, not replacing Chennai, but supporting Chennai in terms of absorbing some of the populations and some of the activities. Now there has to be a market. Luckily, there's a market already existing. We can work on that, and these centers are growth centers because there's some activities already happening there. We can build upon that and incentivize other activities also. So that is one. Second thing is to densify the core city. So this is twin approach which we are taking. There are discussions on this. World Bank experts have different opinion, but I feel that this will help because these growth centers will take care of extra burden which Chennai city will take. At the same time, Chennai city also has to become efficient so that the problems which which Chennai is facing because of sprawl will reduce. Otherwise, if I can imagine in as usual situation, Chennai sprawl will extend up to Kanchipuram that side, Chengalpet that side, which will cause havoc to the entire thing. So metropolitan areas are large, of course, but we need to identify places where we can keep what kind of densification is required, and that will actually help us in protecting a lot of green areas which are still not occupied by real estate, and it will protect water bodies also, and we can make them more sustainable and beautiful and usable for people. So these twin approaches might help the Chennai metropolitan area, and we are working on that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Fantastic points, from low-hanging fruits to a better set of planning approach, to having your communication on point, and to having an implementation plan. Don't just go by your planning plan. I don't know how much time do we have for questions. 5 minutes. So maybe 2 questions, 3 questions max. Who wants to ask? Okay, the gentleman there. If you can tell who are you addressing the question to and your affiliation also. Your name and yeah.
Sir, good evening, sir. I am Kasi Raju, retired from IIT Madras. I work on social service and water bodies also. One suggestion, I want to compare the forest department and PWD department who maintains the water bodies, lakes. Forest department somewhat better. They maintain with IFS officers, rangers. For the lakes, nobody is there. Easily they are encroaching. Even it has been made as a real estate plots. It is going like that. So if you hand over the lakes to the forest department or to the army, it will be safe. Yeah, surely the government should take steps in handing over the lakes to the army or the forest department.
Okay.
Otherwise,
Army
we cannot,
has already been called.
Otherwise, we cannot
This
see
is the
any
first
lakes.
question. Let's go to the next one. Gentleman here. They'll pass you the mic. Please ask the question, not a comment, please.
Good evening to all the guests. I proudly thank everyone to have invited me. My name is Gautam. I am from IMH Group, Indian Metal Hub. The only priority is in today's digital world, people are not safe from their house. Walking is the prior information from the early morning 5:30 to till night 11:30. So they can't go without the platform. There is no clear platform for every human being in our country.
Walking concerns.
Walking concern.
Okay, noted.
No
Absolutely.
platform, no clear platform.
Anybody with a question, otherwise we can...
We can suggest for a good platform where every human being can be implemented from their house.
That is a point taken. Anybody with a question, please make sure you ask a question.
Sir, do you think that Wayanad catastrophe could have been avoided? And does it mean that they have not been proactive, but only reactive? And most of the water bodies have been occupied by the private colleges in Chennai. Then how come the CMDA corporation and all, they are giving water connection, drainage connection, electricity connection and all? Is it the greasing of the palm?
Okay. The question is to me.
No palms are being greased here.
Okay, quickly I will respond to that. This Wayanad, what happened definitely is a alarm bell to all of us, and it might happen anywhere. But we need more evidence on that, how it happened, because otherwise you can't just leave all the hill areas and come back. There has been excess intervention from humans in terms of constructing or disturbing the natural resources that might have caused it. So we need to work on that in terms of getting proper evidence and then come out with regulatory framework of what can be done, what cannot be done. That is one. On the second issue of encroachment has been a perennial issue on water bodies. Definitely it has been. Now, unfortunately, I think 20 years back till Honorable Supreme Court's judgment, if I don't know I'm right or wrong, but that's what my knowledge says, unless there was a complete ban on issuing patta on water bodies. The private parties were given patta, including colleges or whatever, on the water body catchment areas. Now, because of that, we keep creeping. Velachery, for example, Velachery was an area, and it has now developed into, proper urban area. Similarly, a lot of other water bodies have converted into urban areas because of the pressure of the, market or pressure of the demand for housing and all that. But 20 to 25 years, last 25 years, I don't think there has any new encroachment on this, and it's very strict. Courts are also very strict on that, and there are no new encroachments, I would say. Now, whether the earlier thing which has happened was wrong or right, technically it is not wrong because Revenue Department patta is there. Now somebody comes to me asking for a planning permission. All I can look at the revenue, documents and ownership document, and I have to process that. If I don't do that, the person will go to court, and it has happened. There was a contempt case also, and we went to court saying that what is CMD's business in not giving planning permission when patta is in my name. So Honorable Court instructed us, and then we gave that planning permission. On the other side also, there is a discussion on whether this area which land use we have given land use as water body, identified as water body, without referring to the revenue documents. In Master Plan 2, it has happened, and around 1,500 such cases are there, where satellite maps were used, and it was referred as, because water catchment was there, water was present, so they said it is a water body. However, on record, it is a private land in revenue records. So that becomes another challenge. Now, what to do with that? Can we ask them not to? Can we not allow them to develop? That is a question which we have to deal with. If we do that, we have to give them some kind of compensation, which government is not able to give because it will be huge. This similar thing happened in Red Hills catchment area, which was a protected area in Master Plan 2. Recent High Court judgment is saying that how can you put a blanket ban on catchment area and not compensate to these people. Now this is some 23 villages, if I'm not wrong, which is hundreds of hectares, thousands of hectares, which cannot be compensated. We have, the master plan has taken away the right to develop, but land is still with them. They can do agriculture or whatever they want, but they cannot develop this in terms of real estate. So that has gone to court, and court has questioned that. Of course, we are fighting in Supreme Court on that because it is an issue of law. So these challenges are there, which under which we work, and we need to understand that it is not very straight.
Anybody else? A gentleman here has been asking. Here, this side. And the black shirt.
Good evening, sir. Myself, Pradeep. I'm a climate expert with Urban Management Center. So I have a question. So given the pressing challenges of climate change and the need for sustainable urban development, how is the government planning to strategize climate finance, climate budgeting, and climate governance? Specifically, what measures are being considered to ensure that these strategies effectively address the gaps in our current urban planning framework and enhance climate resilience in cities?
Essay type question, and you have to answer in multiple choice.
To my knowledge, climate finance is very costly. The so-called financing for climate, related projects or climate-related interventions are still having that market rate of return. So governments cannot absorb that 16% of rate of return. So that is one thing which I want to point out here. If cheap funds are available, definitely government would like to take and use that. Fortunately, unfortunately, whatever you say, the entire discussion about climate action does not talk about sustainable financing. And it is all costly, whether it is building construction or any other thing which we have to take up. It does have a cost. Now, from where the cost comes, as ultimately, ironically, it comes back to the wealth which is created by economics. So please understand this. There has to be a proper framework. I think there are a lot of discussions, a lot of agencies are roaming around with climate, fund and all that. But financing climate action is not easy. There are issues. We need to address that in terms of sustainability of the finances.
Thanks.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, audience, for your questions. Thank you, panelists. I've heard some great points have come up. So thank you so much. And also thanks for answering the questions. And we thank Mr. Udit Misra for moderating the session. So your vote of thanks. Please deliver the vote of thanks.
Thanks a lot. Absolutely fabulous evening with lots of insightful points. I hope all of you got some thoughts which will energize further thinking on urbanization. Very grateful to all the panelists, especially Mr. Mishra and Dr. Tyagarajan and Justice Chandru. Thank you for taking the time out, and to all the audience, thank you for being here and participating so enthusiastically. Thank you.
Thank you so much once again.